Hello, welcome everyone to our next town hall, and I am super excited for this one. I'm a history major, and so when I got a copy of Ken Yeager's book, which we will be talking about a little bit later, and started reading about the history of the LGBTQ movement in Silicon Valley, and um, and especially about how challenging it was in the early days. I was just fascinated, and I realized I knew some of the people discussed in the book, some of the people well who you will meet on this webinar if you do not know them already, including my colleague Laird and one of my and then a lot of other people that I had met kind of tangentially in through more in San Jose politics, and just kind of learning about the role they had played, and um, and it was just so fascinating. So that's why we kind of thought about this town hall, and I appreciate those who are with us live, and I know the many more that will watch it. Um, and this will be recorded and put up on our website as all of our town halls and sent to everyone who RSVP'd and couldn't be here with us today. So it's a fun time right now with Pride Month. We're having some celebrations here in the Capitol today. I'll be speaking probably on a resolution today on behalf of the Jewish Caucus for Pride Month. We have a big celebration tonight. This weekend, South San Francisco had its first Pride parade. Pacifica had its second, I believe. San Mateo will have its second one coming up soon. We've got organizations like BAMEC that are advocating for equality throughout the region. We have some of the commissions and offices of LGBTQ plus affairs that we'll talk about, but it wasn't always this way. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about, some of that history and some of the history and some of the milestones along the way. But a few things I want to note before we get going. The first time the gay pride flag flew over the city hall in San Jose wasn't until 2001. A gay liberation statue at Stanford was vandalized and destroyed on several occasions in the 80s and 90s. It wasn't until 1984 that Stanford banned LGBTQ discrimination university-wide. We'll talk about several measures in history, but in San Jose, there was, in the county and city, there was anti-discrimination ordinances put on the ballot in 1980 that were rejected on about a 3-to-1 count. So this is and then came the AIDS epidemic, which obviously caused people, caused tremendous harm. We'll go through that, some of those details, but also caused people to greatly fear gay men. There was a ballot measure in the state of California that would have required the quarantining of gay men and gay men with AIDS. Fortunately, that was but the fact that it was even on the ballot is incredible. The Reagan administration refused to acknowledge the AIDS epidemic, and by the time President Reagan finally spoke about AIDS, nearly 21,000 Americans had been killed and thousands more had been infected. So thankfully, we've come a long way since these dark days, but we're fortunate to have many trailblazers here today who've had the courage to come out and form supportive communities. And again, we're going to talk about that history and then a little bit about some of the things still going on today. And I'd like to welcome my first guest, who has some limited availability with us, but he's my current colleague, who I was just so honored and excited to be able to get to serve with. It's Senator John Laird, who's the senator for District 17 since 2020, and he was a former two-term Santa Cruz mayor. He was also in the Assembly before he was in the Senate. He also ran the State Department of Natural Resources. But in his role as mayor of Santa Cruz, he was one of the first openly gay mayors in the United States. Senator Laird, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh, very much for having me and for doing this. And you are a treasured colleague, and I appreciate the fact that you are. It's funny. I see the background now, and I see that we all got lavender Mickey Mouse hats, and I have that behind here, and that was not planned for this great presentation. But I appreciate Josh doing this, and I appreciate him as a colleague. And I'm sorry I can't stay all that long, but having Ken Yeager and Rich Gordon on this together is a real treat. They will tell you about themselves, but they have their own stories of what happened early and the difference they made in the Silicon Valley and San Mateo area. And yesterday, you mentioned the Pride celebrations. Yesterday, we had the 49th Pride celebration in the city of Santa Cruz. We're gearing up to our 50th anniversary next year. It was the 44th year I have spoken from the stage, and it has turned into the biggest political gathering of any kind every year in Santa Cruz County, with the 7,000 people that were there yesterday. And it's exciting because you wanted me to touch a little on the old days, and the great thing is these days. I mean, I never thought. The one thing that gets me every time is the closing contingent in Pride is the Santa Cruz High School marching band. The entire marching band dresses up, rainbow lays, and marches down the street. And that is something we never ever thought would happen. And especially now when there's all these attacks on the rights of kids to control themselves and stuff, the fact that they come, aren't sheepish, just are there all out every year is great. And in the first one I marched in, I think somewhere around 1978, there were more demonstrators than there were people marching. We needed police protection. And we had to hire, and there were also people that went down the street with us. And it was a major thing to be open then. It was one of my favorite stories was that I worked for the county administrator, and I marched, and there was the chair of the seniors commission who I staffed, and he is sitting in an outdoor cafe, and he has the staff to the seniors commission with him. And he said, "Did you see who was there? I just didn't know." And the guy he said it to is gay, and hadn't come out to him yet. And it was just sort of a tribute of what it was like in those years to do. And I just told one of my favorite stories at Pride, because law enforcement has become an issue again about their participation in Pride. I supported it, and now we have an out Latina lesbian as sheriff of Monterey County. She was elected the year before last, and it's like, really? She's not somebody that we should be honoring. But here in those early parades, we had to have protection, and we had to have law enforcement out there. And then a few years ago, I was riding in the parade. I had a convertible, and I am about 2 floats behind the medical marijuana float. And the medical marijuana float, true Santa Cruz, it has about a 10-foot joint, and smoke is puffing out of it. And who gets assigned to walk next to the medical marijuana float but the sheriff and his top deputies? So they come back and talk to me, and they said, "Would you mind if we walked with you?" And I thought there was the arc of history, needing them for protection, and then me becoming the safe port in the storm in Pride. And and as you'll hear, we were all very early elected officials. And when I was elected the first time, there were probably 8 or 10 in the country. 4 years later, we formed the gay elected officials, where Ken and Rich were very active. At the first meeting, there were just 15 of us. And actually, one person couldn't come, and we had a member of parliament from Great Britain. And it's misleading to sound like there's 15, because there were 3 from the Twin Cities, and 3 from Madison, Wisconsin, and 3 from West Hollywood, a couple from San Francisco. And so it was really people scattered all over, and it was always our dream. At that first one, there were a couple of state legislators. They were from Minnesota, and there had been one who was no longer in the legislature from Massachusetts, Elaine Noble. she got redistricted in with a guy named Barney Frank, and they made a deal, and she decided not to run again. Barney wasn't out yet at the time, but he ran. And so with just 2 legislators of the 15, I'm not counting the member of parliament in Britain, it was our dream that path electorally would be the way it was for anybody else, and that you would work your way up. So at one of those first ones was a Dane County, Wisconsin commissioner, and they had 40 or 50 commissioners in the county commission. Her name was Tammy Baldwin, and then she became a city council member in Madison, and then she became an assembly member in Wisconsin, and then she went into the US House of Representatives, and she's now running for her 3rd term in the US Senate. And it was exactly our dream that somebody would be at the local level, be out and work their way up and do it. And I have a couple of comparisons, because when now in the Monterey Bay area, which is my home area, there are more out elected officials in the Monterey Bay area than were in the entire United States when I was elected to office. And
Right, that's extraordinary. Yeah.
well, and it sneaked up on me because Monterey Peninsula has 7 incorporated cities, 5 have open LGBT city council members, and there are now 12 members of the LGBT caucus in the state legislature. That's 10%. That's bigger than any caucus in a legislature in the United States, and we're going to go up in this election. And it also is more than there were entire elected officials in the United States when I was first elected to office. And it is not just those of us that were early that ran, it were those that were early and worked. And when you get in a minute to Ken and Rich, they were really toiling in the fields as well as being elected officials, with Ken's book Run, which everybody should read because it comes in 2 parts. It's the history of sort of the LGBT movement in the Silicon Valley, but it also tells you, if you want to run, here's what you have to think of, here's what you should do. And Rich Gordon was there all the way along. He was the first president of BAMEC, which Ken and Wigsy co-founded, and in which I was an early board member. And so that's the exciting thing. We still have things to go, and you know, we have to repeal the ban on marriage equality, Proposition 8, that's going to be on the ballot this November. We also, the ballot initiative to have forced outing for LGBT kids just failed in the signature, and now we're doing a bill that was just amended and got out of its first committees in the last few days to actually outlaw that. So there's really things going forward, but that's the long arc of history going back. So thank you for letting me be here at the beginning, and I will try to get the link from you, because I'm going to want to hear what Rich and Ken say. And
Well, I appreciate that. I know that was just such, I get to hear some of these stories from you, because it'll come up, you know, we'll have a topic, it'll come up, and I remember you specifically talking about how there's many demonstrators as marchers back then, right? So for you to sort of personally experience that arc and then have 7,000 people, just must be a tremendous, but you know, occasionally bizarre feeling to look back on the years. And yes, I did get a list of the LGBTQ caucus priority bills, and maybe we'll touch on a few of those at the end. But as you say, still work to be done. But you know, to go from the 15 elected officials in that room, you know, with you. In, I don't know, it was probably only like probably 1990, right?
it was 85 actually.
Okay, 85. Okay, so that's,
Yeah.
you know, but still, it's less than 30 years ago to be, as you said, you know, 10% of our state legislature, but more in Monterey County. It's tremendous. So I'm, you know, partly I'm doing this because I'm grateful to all of you, and what we'll do next, we're going to talk to Ken and go through some of the history, and then talk to Rich, talk specifically about San Mateo County.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, Senator Laird, I know you need to sign off, so thank you for being here with us. And then after that, we'll talk to Dana, who's right now living it and creating conditions on the ground in San Mateo County, so that the next generation of youth can come up and have their rights protected, feel their equality. I'm just so, again, I'm so grateful to all of you. So my kids, and specifically my daughter, can grow up in a community that has been supportive. But now we're going to get back to some of that history with Ken. And again, here's a copy of the book, which really got me thinking about all this. And I'm just very appreciative to you, Ken, for documenting this all. But maybe start, I touched on a few of those things earlier, but tell us about like a few of those events that happen that people don't realize about, that don't know about, the parts of the struggle that were maybe pretty painful.
Yeah, maybe the first story, and thank you very much for having us. I should also mention quickly that a number of years ago, Rich, John, and Wiggsy Severson and myself were on Valley Politics talking about the founding of BAMEC. And so if people want to hear some of these stories with all four of us talking, one can just go to queersiliconvalley.org and type in BAMEC and it will show up.
Yes,
But
that was good.
yeah.
Thank you for putting that site. I was going to mention that site as well. And thank you for mentioning Wiggsy too, because I did get to know her a bit as well. And obviously a huge part of this history too. So for sure.
Yeah, one of the first stories that I tell in the book goes back to 1975 and 1978. You know, and you can look back on some of this stuff as laughable because it was so crazy, the opposition that we all had to, go through. But we were trying to get a gay pride proclamation for the city of San Jose. And we first asked in 1975, and it was always rejected. And finally, by 1978, the city council finally agreed to do it. But God forbid that they include the word pride. And so it was Gay Human Rights Week was the wording that they finally allowed. And then the council had voted to approve it on a 4-3 vote. And the backlash was so strong against that by the religious right, who for the first time really sort of woke up and decided that they were going to oppose everything that we wanted, that the city council actually had to rescind it. It was such a hot issue. I mean, it was that political that, again, the religious right could actually then get the council to, rescind, which is not something that most councils really ever do. But there just wasn't any backbone there. And so it wasn't until 9 years later, in 1987, that we finally got the mayor at the time, Mayor Tom McHenry, to issue the proclamation, but he too wouldn't use the word pride because it's just sort of such a loaded word. God forbid we have pride with our, gay and lesbian residents. And then it then isn't until 1991 that Susan Hammer, who was a great ally of our community, then did the proclamation and included the word pride. So it was just even stuff like that just was exhausting. And how much organizing, we sort of had to do at a time when very few people were out. This was, at the very beginning of the gay rights movement, certainly more active in bigger cities, not so much in suburban cities like San Jose. But the real blow came in 1980. The Board of Supervisors, after having long contentious meetings in 1979, agreed to have a ordinance protecting gays and lesbians from discrimination in employment and in housing. And this really had totally rattled the religious right and had sort of come out in force against it, hours and hours of public testimony. But to their credit, the Board of Supervisors approved it. And these kind of non-discrimination ordinances had to happen at the local level because there wasn't any state protection. That would not come until much later. And we still don't have any federal protection. And so cities across the country, not many, but a handful, were passing these ordinances. And one was passed in Miami-Dade County, which then led to the rise of religious right and Anita Bryant and Jerry Falwell. And it really gave a cause for the religious right as they went across the country, overturning ordinances like that had been passed. And so in San Jose, we pass them at the county. And then in 1980, the religious right gets enough signatures to make this a referendum on the ballot. And overwhelmingly, 70 to 30%, if you can imagine it, voted to repeal these ordinances. And that just killed the gay movement. And allies backed away, everybody backed away. And I always hate to bring up Norm Mineta, who is an icon, someone couldn't be more supportive of human rights, if ever there was anybody, actually had to take his name off federal legislation to sort of be able to have non-discrimination at the federal level. There was a bill, people would sign their names. His name was on it, but after 1980, he took his name off. And and John tells the story about how hard it was to even get Leon Panetta, when he was elected to Congress, to put his name on that legislation as well. One of the things that we joke about, and it was nice hearing about, John with the parade, when BAMEC had its first dinner in 1986, we had one elected official who attended. And whenever I tell this story in front of John, he says, Ken, I also attended. So there were two elected officials that were there. But again, we could only get one. When BAMEC formed in 1984, as Rich well knows, we could barely get any candidates to accept our endorsement. We sent contributions, and one person that we gave money to actually sent the money back. People just sort of said, no, they don't want our endorsement. And now, when we have our big brunch or our dinners, just like in Santa Cruz, they have record numbers. We have record numbers of elected officials who come. From one person in 1986 to well over 100 currently. And I might just add, we have our brunch coming up on September 8th, and it's going to be our 40th anniversary. So it'll be great to be able to celebrate that. But we just had to claw our way up from as low as we were, again, with over 2/3 of the voters not wanting any protection for gays and lesbians. And it just took work day by day, organizing, collecting names, raising money, advocating, doing whatever we needed to do. And as you had mentioned, Josh, then you had the AIDS crisis. So,
but before we get to that, because I do want to get to that, and I took some notes from your books on that, from your book on that. But before we get that, again, just to continue to underscore this point, one thing that just shocks me reading your book is that there was a ballot measure in 1978. Now, this one was defeated as the 84 one I referred to, but there was actually a ballot measure, meaning that got enough signatures to qualify, that would have banned gay and lesbian teachers, right? Like, you couldn't be a teacher.
Right.
And that qualified for the ballot in 1978. And then it was an assembly member from Silicon Valley, I believe it was Alistair McAllister.
Yeah, Alistair McAllister.
Who wrote an op-ed. So when the state legislature was considering AB1, actually considering anti-discrimination legislation at the state level, a representative from our area, assembly member from our area, wrote an op-ed against it. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And that was one of the things. And that was one of the things that is that right? That kind of galvanized you to come out and say, hey, I got to do this. You know, I got to be one of the people who does this. Is that right?
Yeah, I had been involved very much in politics. Had worked for any number of elected officials, had gone to Washington, D.C. So this was sort of a world that I knew. Certainly many of my friends knew I was gay, but it was still a time when jobs could be in jeopardy if you were out. Even when I was in Washington, D.C., somebody was trying to sort of organize gay staffers, and there were so few that it never happened. It happened later, but not certainly when I was there. And there were no gay staffers at City Hall or at the county. It was also hidden. It just, no one really knew whether it was going to be safe. And so again, I was tried to organize and do things with on liberal causes, but not for gay and lesbian causes. And so then when I read sort of a local Congress assembly person's comments saying that gays and lesbians were so despicable and so immoral that they deserved no rights, and for the most part wished that we weren't even in San Jose. And I said to myself, well, okay, if this is the mood of my elected officials, then what am I doing? I am not doing enough. And if I wasn't going to come out and work for my rights, I couldn't expect anybody else to do it for me. And so then the following week, then I wrote a rebuttal to his piece, and then came out. And that allowed me then to start working on gay and lesbian issues and connecting with Wigsy Sievertson, and then we formed BAMEC in 1984. But I should also mention, because of the Lyndon LaRouche AIDS quarantine initiative, certainly our foes have always sort of gone to the ballot for this. Remember in 2000, Proposition 22 passes, which states that marriage is only between a man and a woman. Then you had other ballot measures as well, depriving us of the rights to have marriage. There was the Briggs Initiative, which you had mentioned in 78. So we're constantly battling. But in those early days, certainly a lot of those initiatives were able to pass, and virtually impossible to get any sort of legislation at the local level.
Yeah. And as we said, we're still doing that today, right? There'll be a ballot measure to actually overturn Prop 8 from not that long ago. Maybe we'll touch on that a little bit as well. So we're still kind of dealing with that legacy. But yeah, anyway, all that is just extraordinary. It's just extraordinary to me. I do want to mention a couple things but before we move on. Well, first, you mentioned the AIDS epidemic, and I had some stats here from your book. 1987, 235 new HIV diagnoses, 76 new deaths. So it was 172 total, 423 people living with HIV. And you go through that every year to 1991, 335 new cases, 171 new deaths, 604 total. And that year, Santa Clara County started to get organized to get 1.3 million for people who had just learned of infection through the federal Ryan White Act, and kind of get that money. And the first major medical treatment breakthrough in 1992, the combination therapies. But again, 93, 265 people died. New diagnoses, 219 new deaths, almost 1,000 total, 1,300 people living with HIV. Just talk about that time, and we'll talk with Richard about that too. How in some Mateo actually kind of brought people together. But talk. I mean, I was in the East Coast at that moment, but I remember that. I remember the AIDS quilt. I mean, I was remember that time. But what was it like here? Tell us about that, Ken.
You know, many differences, but when we think about when the pandemic started and everybody's fear that people had, couldn't be around anybody, wearing the masks. You had all of the stores limiting how many people could come in at a time. That people who were sick certainly were quarantined, and you couldn't visit. And I mean, just that whole unknown about how easy it was to maybe catch, and death was going to be certain if you were infected. And so all of these precautions, all the discrimination, that's the only time. I mean, now when we went through that several years ago, it's the only time that sort of, when I mentioned what it must have been like to go through the AIDS crisis, that sort of rings a bell a little bit, understanding, that fear that everybody went through. But so many people were getting ill and dying so quickly. Some people were able to hang on a little bit longer, but oftentimes from the time they finally realized that they were infected, it could be 6 months or so before they were dead. And BAMEC lost a lot of our friends and leaders. Rick Rudy, who was one of the founders of High Tech Gays and was an original BAMEC board member, died from it as well. And again, there was no cure. Getting tested often took 2 weeks, if not longer. There was a point where I thought that I might be infected. And I remember going to Dr. McShane, Rich's husband, who was on the medical forefront of all of this, trying to figure out whether to get tested or not. And at the time he said, well, it didn't really do you a lot of good one way or the other because there wasn't any cure. But I went ahead and got tested and was negative. But it was sort of like you weren't sure what to do, where to go, and again, just try to survive it. And it was very tough. I know that when BAMEC went before the Board of Supervisors in 1986, we were able to get funding finally, which was the first time, because a lot of our social service agencies just either didn't know what to do or didn't have any resources to do anything if they wanted to do something. And this was before a lot of organizations actually were formed and were able to get funding to be able to provide social services to people who had AIDS.
Well, thank you for that. I do want to come back and I want to talk about gay marriage and a few other things, but let me bring Rich in. Rich, thank you for being with us. And Rich, of course, you were one of my predecessors representing San Mateo County. And as I understand, the first openly gay elected in San Mateo County.
Right.
So maybe you could first tell us a little bit about that history. And you told me a little story earlier too about kind of going from kind of at least certainly not talking about it, but very to really having it be part of really something who you are and something who you express through even during the course of elections. So anyway, tell us maybe a little bit about those days in San Mateo County.
Sure. And Josh, thanks for hosting this and bringing this group together. I guess where it started is, I was kind of late in coming out. I came out at age 34 in 1982, working in the nonprofit sector. Certainly formative for me until I did run for office was the AIDS crisis. And one of the dynamics of that we've talked a little bit about is it brought a community together here in San Mateo County. We organized and formed a nonprofit called Ellipse. We had equal representation from the lesbian community and the gay male community on our board. There was a lesbian attorney who, without her work, and her efforts at helping us incorporate and get all the legal requirements in place, nothing would have happened. And so there was a tiny little germ of a community, a gay and lesbian community, but we had never had anyone run for office in San Mateo County. There was a guy named Tom Nolan who got elected in 1988 to the Board of Supervisors. And after he was elected, he came out publicly, but he did not run as an out individual. 4 years later, in 1982, I ran for the County Board of Education. I had been out. I mean, I was nowhere in the closet. So I ran as an out gay man. A story that you might be interested in is that I was running against a 13-year incumbent on the school board who was the PTA president countywide. And here's, this gay guy who runs a social agency running for school board, has never been in office before. One of the keys to elections in those days in San Mateo County was getting the endorsement of the local newspaper, the San Mateo County Times, a paper that no longer exists. And one of the dynamics of that for me was that the longtime publisher, John Hart Clinton, publisher of the San Mateo County Times, was very homophobic. And about once a month, he would editorialize in some horrid way about the gay community, and how evil and sinful and disease-ridden we were. It was just awful stuff. He had passed away and his son had taken over the newspaper. And so my opponent and I were invited to come to the editorial board to see whether or not they'd endorse us, one of us. I was a little nervous because of that history of that paper. And we walked into the boardroom and on the wall is a huge, massive oil portrait of John Hart Clinton. And I think, oh my God, the homophobes looking down on me. At the end of the interview, which I thought I had really kind of nailed on all the education issues, the publisher says, anything else either of you want to say? And my opponent said, no one seems to want to talk about the fact that Mr. Gordon is an avowed homosexual who wants to run our schools. And the publisher pushed his chair back, looked at me and says, what do you have to say to that? And I said, well, as an out gay man for over 10 years in this community, I've been appointed by the Board of Supervisors to the Child Abuse Council. I'm president-elect of the Redwood City Chamber of Commerce as an out gay man. I'm currently president of the Kiwanis Club in Redwood City as an out gay man. And I said, so it's never had any issue in terms of my ability to serve this community. I got the endorsement of the paper and won that election. First time that there's been an openly gay man or a lesbian serving from an elected position.
Yeah, well, there's many arc of history moments in this conversation, and that is one for sure. And I should have said, so after the Board of Education, then you, for 5 years, you were on the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors for 13, yep. And then the State Assembly for 6. One piece that struck, well, a couple of things sort of struck me. You were saying about San Mateo County, and you started to say your remarks too, like with the AIDS epidemic, it really brought the community together and people were very supportive. And I think you said set up their own kind of hospital. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, one of the things we were able to accomplish was we did establish this nonprofit called Ellipse, and we did establish a hospice in Redwood City. We only needed it for 6 years because by then some of the drugs had been developed that would help prolong life. But it was there when we needed it, and we secured funding at that point from the County Board of Supervisors. And we had great support with folks like Congresswoman Anna Eshoo and members of the Board of Supervisors who helped us put that funding together. But it was the first time ever that we'd done something like that in San Mateo County, and it was at that point in time, a lot of us felt like, you know, truly our lives were on the line.
Yeah.
And we had to take care of each other because in many cases, folks could not go home. Their families wouldn't take care of them. And in some cases, it was hard time getting nurses and others who would come to take care of folks. As we talked about earlier, that there was this incredible stigma, fear. You know, Ken, I think very beautifully talked about how that was a period of time that you could relate to in terms of the current pandemic that we've just been through.
Yeah. And then you were telling me, so 1992, you were one about 40 people in that North Carolina living room.
Right. So when I got elected in 1992, John Laird told me that, you know, there's this group that meets once a year. So I went to North Carolina. And John was talking about Tammy Baldwin. I had a connecting flight in Chicago to get to North Carolina. And I'm in the little waiting area for this small United flight. And there's this woman there who I hear her talking about politics. And I went over and I said, is there any chance you're going to a meeting in North Carolina? And she said, I'm Tammy Baldwin. And yeah, I'm going. So kind of met her very early on.
Yeah, well, that's fun. Well, that's one of those stories, you know, like you said, that was sort of the dream, right? That, like, you'd be able to, you know, go from that room and serve at all kinds of levels as you all have gone on to do. But with that, let me bring on Dana, and then I want to circle back to a few things, and also give Ken maybe you a chance a little more. We'll talk about WIGSI because I know it was such an important part of this. But Dana, you are a transgender, non-binary activist. You served as a San Mateo County Pride Initiative co-chair, a board member of Coast Pride LGBTQ Plus Center, and a San Mateo County LGBTQIA Plus commissioner. Thank you for all that service. And tell me maybe, you know, well, first just, you know, tell us a little about some of those roles today and some of the things that you're involved with. And then maybe I'd love for you to reflect a little bit on, you know, did you know some of this history, or just hearing some of this history might be fun to reflect on a little bit. But tell us about what are some of the current initiatives of the commission or the center that you're involved with.
For no problem, Senator Becker. And thank you actually as well for having this space and sharing this history is very important. And I do want to just share that I also have the pronouns of they, them, he. And one thing you left is there's a newly board called Reach Coalition. And I'm actually on the board of Reach Coalition as well. So a lot of LGBTQ ambassador work in San Mateo County. But I do recall some of the things that Rich was sharing in regards of his tenure in the work that he had done, and you know, opening a space of acceptability in the county. And so, thank you for what you have done, Rich, for the community. I can share on things, however, that kind of have been probably a little bit more of visibility for LGBTQ community members. Folks that are also identifying as BIPOC as well, just in that diversity of how we share. So in 2007, the Pride Initiative, which is also a health equity initiative of the Office of Diversity and Equity underneath the Behavioral Health Recovery Services. But 2007 of April, it was created. And I think that was kind of I want to say first space of LGBTQ plus focus efforts in the county for like residents, for folks that worked there, and folks that maybe would do some small businesses and things, just felt comfortable with the well-being of this is how you can embrace your LGBTQ authenticity and equity within a health type of a model, doing community wellness work. So that was kind of the things that we were doing in April 2007 to really bring that visibility and representation of LGBTQ plus community members. Then we fast forwarded and we kind of get to 2014. In September of 2014, the LGBTQIA plus commission, it was then LGBTQ plus commission, but it was created, and it was created by Supervisor Dave Pine, who I think has been an amazing ally, I would say, as a board of supervisor and just person just to know. I call him a great friend, just on outline of how support can be provided for LGBTQ plus IA folks that was in the county, that community members that wanted to feel safe, wanted to feel affirming, and wanted some visibility, and feeling like, let's get this commission started. Let's have a space where the board of supervisors of the county can have like an advisory, like a liaison to really connect them closer to the community. And so that's kind of the creating of how the LGBTQIA plus was created. That actually the commission is 10 years old. So happy birthday to the commission of 10 years now almost. But yeah, the first oath of the LGBTQ plus commissioners was on September 26th of 2014. It was a group of about 11 commissioners. They were what we call the founding LGBTQIA plus commissioners. And then they kind of gave the torch and continued to give the torch to where now I sit on this space with a group of 10 others. It's an amazing group in which we are cultivating San Mateo County as a welcoming, affirming, and safe space for LGBTQIA plus and gender expansive community members. Because as you shared, the now is, sharing more of the fluidity within gender and the fluidity within LGBTQIA plus community. So that's kind of the 2014. And then we were thinking as a Pride initiative, when we were having various different meetings, we were going to various different community organizations having these Pride initiative meetings, which meets once a month, every second Wednesday. But we had met for years in local churches, in local event spaces. And we were like, it would be amazing to have an actual Pride Center, a space where community members can feel as a part of their own and can feel like it's a safe space where they can just be themselves. And so then that's when the San Mateo County Pride Center was actually kind of created in 2016. And so if you're hearing the years and the things I'm giving you, is kind of giving you a timeline of how the Pride Initiative started this in 2007. Then we have the commission that was started in 2014. Then from there, now we have the Pride Center that was created in 2016. And then we have the Coast Pride LGBTQ Center that was created in 2019. And that organization, which I also sit as a board member for, is supporting LGBTQIA plus folks that is from Pescadero to Pacifica, and its space is actually in Half Moon Bay. So as we are continuously this timeline, things are getting a little bit more diverse. We're trying, there's a lot more work I think that needs to be done. But I think we have a very good connecting space with the Board of Supervisors who's, wanting that visibility, wanting that representation, and then also that space of affirming for community members that maybe, they may not have that direct connection with, but they have folks like me and other commissioners and community leaders that can give them that. And so then we have, through all those initiatives, we were thinking as a Pride initiative, because this is actually the Pride celebration, how it got started was through the Pride initiative, because it was like, we're going to San Francisco Pride, we may be going over to Santa Clara County for some like Pride events, but it would be amazing to have a celebration in San Mateo County. And so in 2012, actually, we had our first San Mateo County Pride celebration, which is something that is countywide, very, very small. Senator Becker, if you would look at it now, because I know you were in the parade last year, it has grown so magnificently big. And from the celebration, we also said we need a parade. And so now we're having our second year of a parade, and then we have our 12th year of the Pride celebration, and that's in San Mateo. From San Mateo and 2nd and B Street is the parade that will also end at the festivities at San Mateo Central Park. So I'm giving you a timeline to see
Yeah,
when it
that's
really
great.
got
And when is
involved.
and remind us, when is the parade this year?
Yes, I can, and I hope that you will be in the parade
I
again. We
hope
had you
so.
there last year. But the celebration in the parade is this Saturday, actually, on June 8th. It starts at 10:30 a.m. And so that would start at 2nd and B Street. And then it's about 5 or 6 blocks, and then you'll get to the Central Park, which is where the big celebration is. And we have amazing community engagement there. It's family friendly, a lot of local CBOs, even transits. We have Sam Trans that's going to be there and connecting with their Pride bus. And on top of that, it's a space where it's sober. And so all folks feel like it's an amazing space where they can just be affirmed. They can enjoy themselves, can enjoy with community, and it's free. So it's an amazing thing. Again, this Saturday is going to be on June 8th. And then from 10:30 to 11-ish, it'll be the parade. And then come on over to the festival. That'll be at Central Park up until 5 p.m.
All right. Well, yes, I've enjoyed the celebration before, and then also the parade. My son's graduating
Yes.
on Friday, so a lot of family and a lot of stuff going on, but I hope I will be there. I hope I will be there. So we did have and then how was the Pacifica Pride this weekend, right?
Pacifica
I was
Pride,
here, but I
yes,
could
was
not
on
be there.
June 1st.
And it went well. It went well.
It went real well, actually. I checked it out. They had an amazing parade as well, and amazing community. You know, it's good to see the community and the various different cities in San Mateo County hosting their own like pride events, and then you come to this big countywide event too. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, we did have questions submitted. I knew there was going to be an interesting conversation. I knew I wanted to like have a lot of so I don't have a lot of time for questions. I'm just gonna I'll ask this if any of you want to chime in. Craig asks, name an unsung hero who helped us get where we are today. So since this is a little bit of history, if anyone wants to chime in with an unsung hero, Ken, I know you mentioned many in your book, but any quick thoughts on that?
Only because I briefly mentioned him before. Well, Rick Rudy, again, tech is such a big thing down here. And when he, formed High Tech Gays and sort of became a political force, but also gave us sort of entry into tech companies. And as we tried to get them to approve of non-discrimination ordinances and to have spousal benefits and any number of things for our community. And he's passed away for so long ago. I think he's often forgotten, but he was very pivotal with the movement down here.
Well, I appreciate that, because also in your book you talk about that, how the tech sector is sort of seen as very progressive today, but that wasn't necessarily all the case either, right? And that high tech gays was probably a big part of that in helping sort of change the culture within companies.
Yeah, very much so. And again, because we couldn't get any kind of non-discrimination policies at the local, state, or federal level, what began to happen is companies very much wanted sort of well-educated, sophisticated and tech people working for them. And a lot of that ended up being gay people. And so to attract more LGBTQ employees, companies were willing then to pass these non-discrimination ordinances. And as more and more of them were able to do that, it sort of created the space necessary for local governments to start passing them as well.
Yeah. We two questions, and Dana, maybe you weigh. One says from Francis and Palo Alto, how can us address the increase in hate crimes and discrimination against our transgender residents? That was one question. I also had a question from Gail about protecting women candidates from threats of violence. So visionary lesbians may also have, continue to have an impact. So that kind of came up about threats against candidates directly as well as just in general with residents. Anyone take that, Dan? You want to start off?
So I can share about what that can look like. I think I like to say allyship is very fluid, and how can you stand up for other folks? And I will say, in regards of safety, in the commission, there is a lot of things that we discuss in regards of making residents feel safe and affirmed, and connecting with various different council members that we may have within San Mateo County in the various different cities, and sharing about what visibility and representation can look like in regards of safety for them. What we have done in trying to bring more visibility is we have went to the various different cities within the county and have asked them to be a part of our visibility project, in which we asked them to do a proclamation proclaiming that their city is supporting Pride Month, as well as making that an affirming space for residents within that city. And then also raising the Progress Pride flag, which is a very inclusive pride flag, if you want to education on that, and raising it at their various different city halls, and keeping it up throughout the whole month of June. And just that alone, trying to bring safety around for folks, one, that lives in these various cities, to know that you are affirmed, you are seen, and you are safe in this space. And then also giving the education about SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, and really making sure that folks have that education of what it can look like and protections that LGBTQ folks have. Because I think some folks may just think hate crimes in regards of violence, but then also words and microaggressions can also come up as hate crimes. So really trying to give that training and that education, and making it, from our top leaders that are change makers, like the various different elected officials, as well as the Board of Supervisors, to know SOGI, and then sharing that with our maybe police force as well, on what safety can look like, and how everyone should be feeling like they're in an inclusive space. So I would say that would be a step, I think, as an ally. And if you're like a community member, just embracing, I would say, things like pronouns, and making that normalized, to make folks feel like, it's safe to actually have you utilize your pronoun. It's safe for you to be in this space and actually bring your pronouns. And I do this a lot of times in spaces that may not use pronouns, just to make sure that that's affirming, and then sharing that that's a safe space so that folks can feel that. So I would say that would be it. You can also engage and connect with various different commissioners that you may have in your city, because we're all in kind of various different cities, and just kind of share things that we can probably take back to as an advisory to our group that can go to the Board of Supervisors to share, to make sure that we're giving that safety for folks, especially those that are trans identifying.
Well, I'm sure, Ken, you're smiling when you hear about the flag, right? Because you think about all those battles that you had for many, many years to get the flag flown. Someone also asked, Karen asked San Carlos about advice to young adults entering the political arena. And I'm sure, Ken, you're always, especially, I'm sure any of you are, but Ken, willing to give advice to folks, I'm sure, if they reach out. But do you hear from, people concerned about threats of violence? Is that something that any of you hear when people say, I'm thinking about running, but I'm kind of concerned about that? Is that something, Rich, you sort of nodding your head, is that something that people, you hear from folks?
I think one of the realities is that the struggle is not over. We've talked a lot about history, and Dana's talked about our current history. But the reality is that, trans people, particularly trans youth, face danger. There are, I think, candidates, maybe we live in a bubble in some ways, but there are candidates across the country, whether they be trans individuals, lesbians, or gays, who face threats. And so the challenge that we face is that we're always having to come out, be present, help create the safe space. It's an ongoing issue. But I think if you're going to be a candidate, one of the things you have to be prepared to do is to be authentic, and be yourself, and know that there are folks who are going to help you and protect you and support you. The community will rally.
Yeah, yeah, that is important, and because there is hate. Someone on my team was just telling me, but I did a pride post on Twitter. They said, "Oh, you're getting a lot of hate." You know, I was like, "Okay, well, we all have to be out there." And Dana just updated my pronouns too, so it's updated. Well, we're gonna go a couple minutes over, but I don't want to keep you all too long. But I did want to touch on a couple other things, and I apologize we didn't get to all the questions. But Ken, I did want to talk about gay marriage and just kind of flash back to that for a moment, because again, it's so and again, I hope we're going to share this with the young people as well. Watch this and understand a little bit of some more of that history, because I remember that some of these most, but it wasn't that this was not that long ago, right? And it's hard to believe, but it was only 2013, that kind of the arc of the gay marriage struggle. And maybe you can chat about that for a little bit. And then you were really the first one to, and you were as an openly gay supervisor to do the first marriage in Santa Clara County, correct?
Yeah, who knew that county supervisors could be people who can certify marriages? And so, yeah, it was 2008 when the California Supreme Court overturned Prop 22. And that happened in May, and it was in June that you could finally get married.
Right, doesn't it? Yes, right. And then 2013 was formed by the Supreme Court, but
yes.
we were worried that it was going to get taken away. But yeah, keep going.
So yes, they're very short window, what, 6 months or so, if it, maybe even a little less than that, where people could get married. And so there was about a month between when the California Supreme Court made their decision and when it actually you could get married. There was about a month in between, so we had a lot of time to sort of prepare. And so of course I had to be the one that did the first marriages in Santa Clara County. I mean, there was no doubt about it. And of course, because counties are do marriages, and so it was always going to be happening in the clerk's office. Yeah, so I was able. We found 2 men and 2 women, and it was a big deal, and it was very exciting. And then of course we lost it, but it came back in 2013. And that was one of those things that they had made the decision, and it was just like the next day or so that you could get married again. And the lines were out the door. And of course, there I was in my wedding robe, and so was able to marry 27 people, 27 couples that day. So that was very exciting.
Hey, Josh, if I might just add a quick little personal note. In June of 2008, when the California Supreme Court issued its ruling saying gay marriage in California was acceptable, I got a call from the local newspaper saying, you're the only elected gay person we know. What do you think about this? And my response was, I don't have time to talk to you. I'm trying to find a wedding planner. And that was a headline in the newspaper the next day. County supervisor looks for wedding planner.
Nice.
That's fun. A good advertisement there. But Prop 8 is still technically on the books in California, so that's where we're. And my current colleague Evan Lowe, who's helping lead that fight. Can any of you comment on that? So that will be a ballot measure to kind of rectify that, correct?
Yeah, it will clean up the state constitution, currently, unless something else happens at the U.S. Supreme Court, we have national protection for gay marriage, but cleaning up the California Constitution would be a good thing to do.
Yeah, and that is qualified, right? Already, that's yeah. So it'll be on the ballot. I guess just maybe a little bit in closing, although it's a big topic, just because someone did, a couple people did write about the national, do you, are you concerned about a rollback from what you see nationally? Any thoughts, any comments on that? When you look at the headlines.
Yes. I'll give you the short answer. Yeah, and a lot of it's just going to be the U.S. Supreme Court. And I think we're going to have decisions certainly at the districts level in a lot of conservative states that are just going to chip away at some of these rights, as it happens, with women as well. And if you have former President Trump as the new president, you can imagine with control of the House and the Senate and the courts. I mean, I think everything's going to get rolled back. States might have a little bit more leeway in what is taken away, but it could be very, very bad, very bad.
I think that I just wanted to share in saying that, and you're right, it can be very bad. And the hope is that we get out and vote, because I think this is a time where our votes really can rock and make sure that we don't, or have to be faced with these drastic changes that could come upon us. So please, 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 voting, your vote counts. I think a lot of you all can actually share how each vote matters. And so making sure that you do that so that everyone can kind of have that space and feel comfortable, to be their authentic selves and in somewhat of a diverse, hopefully, country that we're in. So I would say just voting alone will be some of the things to kind of help us out here.
Yeah. Well, those are perfect kind of remarks, and in addition to the presidential, which I'm sure many folks are focused on, there are many. One of my current colleagues and two of my former colleagues are running for very key House races here in California. So, kind of keeping or flipping the House for Democrats, I have to say, is important for that perspective. But also, or they're working on that, but as referred to, I'll certainly be involved, and I was at the kickoff for that effort to do that constitutional cleanup, because we want to make sure that California is protected as much as possible here. And I know that's something we definitely can't talk about. I know we can't talk too much about politics, but that I know we can't talk about, and I'll be certainly part of that effort. Anyway, well, I'll turn over maybe just a couple, if anyone has a few closing remarks, and maybe turn it over to each of you. And Ken, maybe you can tell us remind us of that BAMEC anniversary, and from that the initial board was you, Wigsy, Rich, and John. Were there other people on there as well at that time as well?
Yes, there were. It was a total of 8.
Okay.
A couple from each of the counties.
Okay.
From
yeah,
that's
actually, that was interesting. You proactively, and you mentioned that to me when we were talking. You really you said you really thought about the time. Hey, we want San Mateo County, Santa Cruz County included in this, along with Santa Clara County.
Yeah, all 3 counties, didn't have a LGBTQ political organization. There were a couple Democratic clubs, maybe, but the idea was to see if we could do it for the Bay Area, just because of more clout, and of course, then having to talk to people in the other 2 counties to see if this is something that they wanted to do. And it was great that Rich wanted it, and John, and then we were able to get a couple other people. But yeah, as Rich and I are here, 40 years later, hey, where did the time go? But it's just a way to sort of encourage people to get involved. And if there's no club or political action committee in your city or wherever, start one, and just get going, because it's amazing the changes that you can make at the local level that you can't really at the state or federal level, just because of what's involved. But it's just so important to have a voice and to be speaking out. and making friends along the way and making history as well. So I say go for it.
Well, thank you. And again, thanks for Wigsy Herdu as a key part of that history as well. Rich, closing comments?
Yeah, first of all, just again, Senator, thank you for doing this, for helping to capture our history and the progress that we're making and continue to make, the efforts that Dana does and his cohorts and the cohorts that exist on the commissions. And I guess I would just say that Harvey Milk said the difference occurs when you're out. That's what makes the difference. And so creating safe spaces for people to be out in their communities and recognizing that the battle and the fight continues and will continue. And so we have to keep making steps forward, marching towards equality. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Dana, any final thoughts?
Thank you also, Senator Becker, for this space and inviting me to be in this space with this wonderful panel. I would say I just want to give thanks also to my trans ancestors that actually did the representation in the battle in Stonewall to get us into a space where we can have these conversations as well. The thing that I would like to share is, please, if you can, make it out to the San Mateo County Pride Celebration and Parade this Saturday, June 8th. If you want more details, you can go to our website, smcpridecelebration.com, and it just shares a little bit of the history of the celebration and how you can kind of be involved in the festivities. But hope to see you there. Also, for those that are intersectional, as I am, that identifies LGBTQIA+, and that's Black or African American, Juneteenth is also a part of Pride Month. And so just want to also uplift those identities of Happy Juneteenth and Happy Pride as well.
Excellent, excellent. There'll be some good Juneteenth, especially at the Dominique Hoskins Black History Museum, right in Redwood City.
Yes.
That we just got, really got that location. So that'll be a fun one as well. Well, I just want to thank you all for joining and helping relieve some of this history. But as we've talked about, it's not just history, right? It's really that history of the struggle and the fight. And as we know, and we talked about, there's going to be a fight here, and I get to, hear it all the time and see some of the legislation that's still going on, and across the country, some major battles coming up and work to be done. So thank you all. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.